Welcome to tonight's journey into the chilling mysteries of Epping Forest. This ancient woodland has been the backdrop for countless tales of terror-ghostly apparitions, unexplained whispers, and encounters that defy all logic. Tonight, I'll be sharing 15 of the most haunting stories that have emerged from these woods. Stories that will make you question what's lurking just beyond the trees. Before we dive in, I want to share something personal. I'm currently raising funds for my dad's medical treatment, and every bit of support helps. If you'd like to contribute, the link to the GoFundMe is in the description below. Your kindness means the world to me. Now, let's step into the shadows of Epping Forest, if you dare. Story 1. I'll never forget the night I encountered him. It was late autumn, the kind of evening where the fog rolls in thick, swallowing up the moonlight and muffling every sound. I was driving back home after visiting a friend, taking the quieter roads through Epping Forest. I don't scare easily, but something about the stillness of the night made me uneasy. The forest seemed alive, like it was watching me. As I approached High Beach, the air felt colder, biting against my skin even with the car windows closed. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of hoofbeats. At first, I thought it must be my imagination. Who rides a horse in the middle of the night? I slowed down, and that's when I saw him. Out of the fog, a rider emerged on a massive black horse. He wore a tricorn hat and a dark cloak that billowed as if caught in a wind I couldn't feel. I froze. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The rider didn't look at me. He just galloped past, his horse's hooves making sound on the road, and then he was gone. Just like that. I sat there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But I swear, for just a moment before he vanished, I saw his face a pale, twisted expression that seemed to whisper, "Leave." I didn't need to be told twice. I sped away, not daring to look back, the sound of those phantom hooves echoing in my mind. Story 2. A few years ago, some friends and I decided to go camping in Epping Forest. We thought it would be fun, just us, the trees, and the stars. We set up our tents near Lowton Camp, this ancient site that has a lot of history tied to it. It was peaceful at first, the kind of quiet that feels nice during the day, but turns creepy when the sun goes down. That night, we were sitting around the fire, laughing and telling stories, when we started hearing noises. At first it was faint, like rustling leaves. We thought it was just animals. But then, it got louder. It sounded like marching. We all froze, looking at each other like, "Did you hear that?" The sound grew closer, heavy footsteps, metal clanking, like armor. Then we heard it, a battle cry. It was loud, piercing, and coming from the woods around us. My heart was racing as we grabbed our flashlights and shined them into the darkness. And that's when we saw her. There she was, a tall figure with wild red hair, wearing what looked like old, torn armor. She was holding a spear, and her eyes, they burned with anger. Behind her there were others, shadowy figures like soldiers. They didn't look at us. It was like they didn't even know we were there. They just marched on, their shapes flickering in and out of the darkness. We didn't sleep that night. How could we? The sounds, the cries, they lasted for hours. The next morning, we packed up and left without a word. I don't know if what we saw was real or if we imagined it, but I know one thing for sure: I'll never camp there again. Story 3. There's a spot in Epping Forest called Hangman's Hill, and if you've ever heard about it, you'll know it's not a place you go for fun. My friends and I decided to check it out one evening, thinking it would be a laugh. You know, just some harmless urban legend stuff. But I'll tell you right now, it's no joke, ... The deal is, if you park your car at the bottom of the hill and put it in neutral, it starts rolling uphill. Sounds ridiculous, right? We thought so too. But when we tried it, it actually worked. Our car, with no engine running, started creeping upward, as if it was being pulled by something invisible. At first we were amazed, laughing and joking about ghosts pushing the car. But then, the temperature inside the car dropped, like someone had opened a freezer door, and the laughter stopped when we heard Ita whisper. None of us could make out the words, but it sounded like it was coming from right outside the car. One of my friends, trying to act tough, got out to check. He was only outside for a few seconds before he jumped back in, pale as a sheet. He swore he'd seen a shadowy figure at the top of the hill, hanging from a tree. We didn't stick around to find out if he was right. We sped out of there, so fast we nearly ran off the road. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Some people say it's just an optical illusion, but I felt something that night, something cold, something real. If you ever go there, don't go alone. And whatever you do, don't get out of the car. Story 4. It was a few years ago when I first heard about the ghost near the King's Oak pub. Some say it's the spirit of a young girl who drowned in one of the forest's ponds a long time ago. Being the skeptic I am, I thought it was just a spooky tale people told to freak each other out. But one night, I found out it wasn't just a story. I had just left the pub after meeting some friends, deciding to take a walk through the woods before heading home. It was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. As I passed by the pond near the pub, I noticed something strange, a ripple in the water. There was no wind, no ducks, nothing that should have caused it. Curious, I stopped to look closer, and that's when I saw her. A pale figure, standing just beneath the surface of the water. She wasn't moving, but her eyes were wide open, staring straight at me. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stepped back, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then, without warning, she moved. Her hand shot up out of the water, reaching toward me. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, tripping over roots and barely making it back to the road. When I looked back, the pond was still and quiet, as if nothing had happened. I've never walked that path again, and I can't even look at the pond without feeling that same icy fear creeping up my spine. Story 5. They call it the suicide pool, and honestly, I wish I'd never gone looking for it. The legend goes that anyone who spends too much time near the pool feels a pull, like something calling them to the water. Some people say it's cursed, others think it's haunted. Whatever it is, it's not natural. My cousin and I decided to find it one summer evening. We'd heard the stories, but we didn't believe them. After wandering through the woods for a while, we stumbled upon it, a small, dark pool hidden by overgrown trees. The air felt different there, heavy, like it was hard to breathe. As we stood there, something changed. My cousin, who'd been laughing and joking just moments before, went quiet. He walked to the edge of the pool and just stared into the water. I called his name, but he didn't respond. When I grabbed his arm to pull him back, he turned to me, and his eyes, they weren't right. They looked empty, like he wasn't even there anymore. I practically dragged him away, and as soon as we were out of sight of the pool, it was like he snapped out of it. He didn't remember what happened, but I do. I remember the way he looked, the way the air felt, and the faint sound of whispers coming from the water. We never went back, and I don't recommend anyone else does either. Story 6. I was driving home late one night, taking the Wake Arms roundabout through Epping Forest. The road was empty, and I was tired, barely keeping my eyes open. Suddenly, my headlights caught something up ahead, a figure on horseback. I slowed down, confused. Who rides a horse on the road at night? As I got closer, my confusion turned to terror. The rider didn't have a head. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it was still there, this tall, dark figure, sitting perfectly still on a massive black horse. And then, it started moving, crossing the road right in front of me, ... I slammed on the brakes, but there was no sound, no thud. The rider just vanished. I sat there for what felt like forever, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I drove home shaking the whole way. I later found out that other people had seen him too, the headless horseman of Wake Arms roundabout. It's not just a story, it's real. And trust me, once you've seen him, you'll never forget it. Story 7. It was late one winter night when I saw it. I was out walking my dog, taking a shortcut through a part of Epping Forest near the Wake Arms. The air was crisp, and the moonlight was just enough to light my path. Everything was calm until it wasn't. I heard it before I saw it, the sound of wheels creaking and horses' hooves clopping against the ground. I stopped, confused, because there was no way a carriage would be out here. Then, from the darkness, it appeared. A black coach, pulled by two massive horses, their breath visible in the cold air. The coach was old, like something from the 1800s. The windows were dark, but I felt like someone or something was watching me from inside. My dog started growling, his fur standing on end, something he'd never done before. As the coach passed me, the driver, a shadowy figure with no face, tipped his hat. And then, it was gone. Just like that. No sound, no trace, nothing. I ran home, my dog pulling me as if he couldn't get away fast enough. I still hear those wheels and hooves sometimes, echoing in my mind. Story 8. A few years ago, I joined a group of friends on a late-night walk through Epping Forest. We were looking for a thrill, sharing ghost stories as we wandered deeper into the woods. We didn't expect anything to actually happen, but then it did. It started with little things. We heard faint whispers coming from the trees, but when we stopped to listen, it was silent. Then one of my friends yelped and jumped back, saying something had touched her shoulder. We all laughed it off, teasing her about being scared, but then it happened again to someone else. This time, the touch was harder, like a push. Things escalated quickly. Rocks began falling from above, hitting the ground around us, even though there were no cliffs or hills nearby. One of us, trying to be brave, yelled into the woods, "Is someone there?" And that's when we heard it, a guttural laugh, low and menacing, coming from all around us. We ran. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. But the whole time, it felt like we were being followed. Branches snapped behind us, and every few seconds, we'd feel that icy touch on our backs or shoulders. When we finally made it back to the car, it wouldn't start right away, as if something didn't want us to leave. I don't know what we encountered that night, but I'll never forget how it felt like we weren't welcome, like something wanted us out of there. Story 9. It was a foggy evening when I first heard the story of the ghostly biker. I was driving through Epping Forest, taking the Wake Arms roundabout as usual. The road was quiet, almost eerily so. As I turned the corner, my headlights caught something, a motorbike lying on its side in the middle of the road. I pulled over, thinking someone might need help, but when I got out, there was no one there. The bike looked old, covered in rust, like it had been there for years. As I stood there, trying to figure out what to do, I heard a low, rumbling sound, like an engine starting up. I turned, and there he was. A man on a motorbike, dressed in black leather, but his head, it wasn't there. He revved the engine, the sound deafening in the quiet night, and then he sped toward me. I stumbled back, bracing for impact, but he passed right through me. The cold that followed was unlike anything I've ever felt. It was like my body had been dipped in ice. When I looked back, the biker and his motorbike were gone. There wasn't even a tire mark on the road. I didn't sleep that night, and even now, I can't drive through that roundabout without feeling like he's watching me. Story 10. I'd always loved hiking in Epping Forest. There's something magical about being surrounded by trees, with the sunlight streaming through the branches. But after what happened last spring, I haven't gone back. I was walking alone that day, following a trail I'd never taken before. Everything was normal at first, just the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves. But then I noticed something strange. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. And then I heard it a whisper. It was faint, like someone speaking from far away. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded wrong, like a voice that didn't belong to a person. As I kept walking, the whispers grew louder, coming from all directions. The trees seemed to be leaning toward me, their branches reaching out like arms. I turned to head back, but the path behind me looked different. It was darker, narrower, like the forest had shifted. The whispers turned into voices, overlapping, calling my name. I ran, not caring where I was going, just desperate to get out. When I finally found my way back to the main road, I turned around, and the trail I'd been on was gone. Just trees, thick and unbroken. I don't know what I stumbled into that day, but whatever it was, it didn't want me there. Story 11. I'd heard about Hangman's Hill from a co-worker who swore it was haunted. The car rolls uphill, he said, and people see shadows in the trees. I didn't believe it, thought it was just an optical illusion. So one night, I convinced my girlfriend to come with me and check it out. We parked at the bottom of the hill and put the car in neutral. Just as they said, it started rolling uphill. It didn't make any sense. My girlfriend laughed nervously, saying it was probably just a trick of the land. But then she stopped laughing and pointed out the window. I followed her gaze and saw it. A dark figure hanging from a tree branch near the top of the hill. I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow, maybe a broken branch. But as we watched, it started to sway, like it was moving on its own. Then the car stopped rolling and the engine sputtered. My heart was pounding as I turned the key, trying to start it, but it wouldn't budge. That's when the tapping started. Something was tapping on the back window, soft at first, then harder. My girlfriend screamed, and I turned to see what it was, but there was nothing there, just the shadow, swaying, closer now. The car finally started, and we peeled out of there. I didn't look back, but I swear I felt eyes on me the whole way down the hill. Whatever we saw that night, it wasn't just a story. Story 12. This one happened to my uncle, and to this day, he refuses to talk about it. He was walking his dog through the forest one evening, something he'd done hundreds of times before. But that night, he took a different path, one he hadn't noticed before. It was narrow, winding, and overgrown, like it hadn't been used in years. As he walked, he started to hear footsteps behind him. He stopped, thinking someone else was on the trail. But when he turned around, there was no one there, just the empty path. He shook it off and kept walking, but the footsteps continued, always staying just a few steps behind him. Then he saw her, a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing in the middle of the path. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and her face was hidden by her long, dark hair. He called out to her, asking if she was lost, but she didn't answer. She just stood there, silent and still. When he stepped closer, she lifted her head, and he froze. Her eyes were black, completely black, with no whites, no pupils. She opened her mouth, but instead of speaking, she let out this horrible, guttural scream. My uncle ran, his dog barking and pulling him toward the road. When he finally made it home, he was shaking so badly he could barely unlock the door. He never walked in the forest again, and honestly, I don't blame him. And that brings us to the end of tonight's chilling journey through Epping Forest. If you enjoyed these stories, or if they kept you up at night, don't forget to subscribe to Panda's Nightmares for more haunting tales. Hit that like button, follow for more, and be sure to check out my other videos for even more spine-tingling stories. Before you go, I want to remind you that I'm raising funds for my dad's medical treatment. If you can, please consider donating using the GoFundMe link in the description below. Your support truly means so much to me. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are closer than you think. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.